every month there would be something that would like hit me over the top of the head. I mean, I sold hundreds of thousands of dollars of seats into this program before we even had a company.
I would get triggered by the smallest thing.
Yeah.
And when you reach that, you take a step back and you think, well, what's wrong with me? Like I wasn't like this.
In one day, literally let go of like hundreds of people. And I had to decide like who stays and who goes. We sold anything and everything, and there was a disaster.
Hello, this episode of Misfit Founders is brought to you in partnership with Paddle. Paddle is a payments infrastructure platform for over 4,000 software companies. They manage billing, tax, subscriptions, pricing, retention, and also fraud, so you don't have to. So if you're a SaaS or software founder, check out the link in the description. Might be useful. Now, back to the episode. Hopefully everything works well.
Yeah.
It's out of my control now.
It is.
My luggage is all lost.
I mean, how unlucky is that? You know?
The one time, the absolute one time. Because when I travel for work, for business, whatever, I never do whole. Because you hear all of these horror stories, and I'm like, no. Now, this is the first time I do whole, because I had to, because I had lights and everything.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I need to. Hopefully, this one time, they don't lose my luggage. And anyways, I got all the cameras and everything in a different bag. But
that's some resiliency, though. When we were chatting before today, trying to set up the time, you said you lost your luggage. I was like, well, how the heck are we going to do this? But you pulled it off, and here we are.
I drove straight to like photo and video store, and I'm like,
wow,
rent me some stuff. I need it now.
I mean, you take the job seriously.
Well, you have to. I think if there's one thing that I've learned of doing anything, be it being an entrepreneur or being a professional or so on, if you don't put 100%, you don't get 100%. I think that's the simplest way to phrase it.
It's so true. And as founders, we're easily distracted.
Oh, yeah.
And it can go many different ways. But staying focused on something long enough, but not too long, is actually like part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen closely to anyone that has an inch of success, they'll tell you persist. That's the biggest thing you could do. Quitting too early, you never know that you quit too early until someone shows you what could have been. And that usually doesn't happen, because you see stories of people that are successful and so on, and you make stories in your head around, well, no, because of that. So you make reasons.
Right, you do.
So you kind of have to be in a parallel universe, where in one universe you succeeded and in one you didn't. You're like, if only I took another couple of steps, I would have made it.
Well, a lot of founders don't also it's like they say they want feedback, but they don't really listen.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what's interesting is great salespeople are amazing listeners, but not all founders are great listeners. So you also have the scenario where like you've got a founder just pounding their head against the same thing over and over again, and they keep failing at it. But it just requires like a subtle difference or a nuance or a change in positioning or the market, or maybe it's a pricing change. And a lot of them just end up giving up, to your point.
Yeah.
Some of them don't make the decisions to actually make the changes that's needed while surviving too. I've been in that scenario too, where like I probably should have given up on something that wasn't working after trying so many different things. And so there is a point where you're like, okay, well, this thing's not going to work. But the vast majority of the time, people they just don't give it enough time.
Well, you said an interesting thing that not a lot of salespeople persist, not a lot of founders persist. And I think also not a lot of founders are salespeople in a sense, right? And I think that's where a lot of the lack of grit comes along, because I do feel like sales is one of the grittiest roles and jobs in the world, in a sense.
I love sales, and it took me a long time to actually love sales. But the most successful people that I've encountered, like the people that I know who've like really exited and have done really well, have generally really had to focus and learn sales. There's a phrase that I keep using with a lot of the startups that I work with, and I call it founder-led growth. Founder-led growth is really just the founder taking the initiative to actually have those conversations and to try to drive sales.
Yeah.
One thing I've learned the hard way numerous times is trying to delegate early sales is generally a disaster. Like, you really can't delegate that early customer discovery. And I don't think it's because you can't delegate it. I think it's because you actually need those feedback loops to build a good product or a good service.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we kind of hopped into this. It's a very interesting story because we met like a week ago.
Yeah, if that.
It was like a week ago, not even a week. It was last week. It was like, I'm at SaaS Talk. And by the way, we're at SaaS Talk. This is the first conversation that I have in this series in partnership with Pado. They helped set this up for me. And we're here. Misfit Founders is on the road. This is the first road show. And I said I'm going to trial this road show thing. Who knows? Maybe I'll come to US next.
That'd be amazing.
And so on. If I don't lose my luggage.
Yep, that's right.
But we jumped straight into it. What I usually do is I try to contain. This is very opposite to interviewers usually and podcast hosts, which do a deep dive into their guests to understand and ask the right questions. I don't do that. I do the reverse. I try to know as little as possible because then I can ask questions that will help highlight some of your background, some of your stories, and so on, because I am genuinely interested in learning. And I think everyone watching goes through that exact same discovery journey with guests. So rather than me knowing your story and asking you very specific questions, it's a discovery type of setup.
That works for me.
And it worked really nicely because we just met last week.
We did.
So do you want to introduce yourself and do an elevator pitch of your business?
Yeah, sure. I'm Craig Zingerline, currently CEO and co-founder of a company called Velocity Growth, but I've got about 25 years in entrepreneurship and founding companies. This is my 6th company. I like to say that I've had a couple successes and a few epic failures. And I'm at the stage with my company where it's still a bit of a roller coaster. But my focus with my company is on what I call holistic growth. So we do hands-on work to help founders and marketing teams get their products out into the wild to build demand. And we do that through kind of 3 channels: search engine work, performance marketing work, and lifecycle marketing work. We used to do a lot more things. Simplified the model. It's a much simpler business now.
By lifecycle, what do you mean?
Everything from the intersection of marketing to product through revenue. So when we see a lot of gaps, I see a lot of gaps with startups between marketing and product. And I've actually had multiple times in my career where I've actually played that kind of like head of growth role where you're bridging that gap. So with lifecycle, I like to look at everything from marketing handing off into product. So it's onboarding, it's activation sequences. If it's a B2B scenario, it might be lead scoring, might be revenue ops. It's certainly going to be revenue-centric metrics that we're looking at. So really trying to move the user through that buyer journey and do that in like a not spammy, not overly salesy way. Try to be value additive the whole way.
And does that include retention as well, like retention funnels?
Yeah, it's shocking like how many founders don't really even know how to build a cohort report on retention. And not their fault. Like most, if you haven't worked for a Series A plus company, you're probably not really looking at like net revenue retention or gross revenue retention or like cohort based metrics like that. Maybe if you're a sophisticated founder, you are. But in a lot of scenarios, if you've raised some money or you bootstrap it, you're not really worried about that. So yeah, a lot of that retention focus comes in first kind of educating people on like what are these themes and topics, and then what can you actually do to increase those metrics. And in retention is actually fairly easy to manipulate, but you generally have to start with onboarding.
Yeah, it's funny how they bring you in for onboarding and eventually you wind up focusing more on retention.
Yeah,
totally. That's a big lack. That was a
Yeah.
big lack for us. Luckily, I think that my partner and I, grew up as SaaS founders in an era where you had so much access to information.
Totally.
And we're big consumers of information, blogs, video tutorials, courses, and so on. And when we started Jigsaw, it was already a big focus on, hey, can't have a leaky funnel.
Yeah.
So fix retention, focus on retention first. So we were focusing on retention messaging and funnels and initiatives before we even had a proper onboarding and acquisition funnel. So, but it's interesting that that's still a big challenge.
Well, I think it's like top of funnel in fundraising and all these things are like really kind of sexy, fun things to work on, right? Talking about demand generation or customer activation, customer acquisition, but like that, and I love doing that. And like we offer that, that's fun. It's great work. But in order to kind of get to that like level of scale that most companies never kind of get to, those founders have brought in a level of sophistication with their models where they've already cracked the code for customer acquisition. They've already perfected onboarding. Now they're starting to look at things like upsells and cross sells, additional product lines. It's when M&A starts to come about. So all that comes from a focus on looking at those core kind of baseline retention metrics. And this stuff is just like, if you're not exposed to it, then you don't have as many opportunities to learn about it, right? So like it's not even in the nomenclature as much. When you talk to a really early stage founder and you're like, who has a financial model? Some people raise their hand. Who's thought about customer acquisition? Most people have. Who's building a product? Everybody raises their hand. Who's got a cohort view of the retention model? And everybody's like looking around like, it's okay. Like, okay, we'll work through that. You know?
And do you feel that that's the biggest aha moment that your clients have? Or what's that big aha moment when they bring you in and say, right, we got it? What's the most common occurrence when it comes to that?
I mean, I think it depends on stage. So the really early stage customers are blown away when we're able to figure out how to build demand for them. And a lot of times it's not just they're hiring us to go run marketing. It's like they're hiring us to go do marketing, but they're also doing a bunch of work, whether it's account-based marketing or they're writing content or they're supplementary.
Right, yeah.
For the later stage companies that we've been working with, we're seeing a lot of aha moments with this scorecard model that we've been rolling out, which forces my team and the client internal teams and the executive teams to come together on the landscape of metrics from like basically first point of conversion through revenue. And so when you start to see that play out over 4 to 6 weeks, generally when we get involved, I mean, there's times where it doesn't work out, but most of the time when we get involved, like we're starting to see better metrics because we're improving on something that maybe was inefficient or hadn't been turned on before. When you start to see, okay, well, I can invest X and return Y in pipeline. It doesn't mean revenue yet, but we can start to model, we can model pipeline, we can model revenue. The founders start to get a sense of predicting what's to come instead of just reacting to like whatever they're seeing. And that's an aha moment. The second you can start to say, okay, well, now I have a model. And if I apply kind of like horsepower and cash to this scenario, it's going to yield me something in return. When you figure that out, that's a super exciting moment.
I suppose, yeah, because one, you're, like you said, you're entering this this prediction state where you gain a lot more confidence in where you're heading.
Totally.
And then it's like, okay, now we mastered this. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of companies, founders, teams lack, because otherwise there wouldn't be the level of patterns when it comes to how you run your ship, in a sense. Yeah. Because I feel, I don't know, my own view on this is a lot of the cultural dismantling that happens in some organizations where stress levels are intense are because of that lack of confidence. You don't know what you're doing, so stress levels are intense. People start not performing or not getting along. Culture
totally
starts dipping, in a sense.
I call it panic mode. And we see this all the time. And I think we're past the stage, but for a while we seem to be acquiring customers that had literally just fired their marketer, or their CMO quit, or they burned through their sales team, or they had an executive leave, or the board made them make a change to, they fired their agency, they bring us on board. And it happens for a lot of reasons, but when you're really early, you can't predict stuff, right? That's why it's really hard for a marketer in a pre-product market fit role. You could be an amazing marketer and fail at growing a company simply because they haven't cracked the market. The foundation's not built yet. And marketers aren't they're not magicians, right? But often the expectation is that a marketer can just come in and figure it out. At the later stage, what we see, these problems that you're talking about, this panic mode kind of gets created when the user kind of gets handed off from marketing and then to the product. Oh, and then if it's a SaaS company, it's then it goes to onboarding and the CX team. And then it moves to a RevOps team. And then there's a renewal team that's owned by sales. And so the client journey, for the client, they just want value, right? But for the company, they're passing this user, the set of users, to different people based on stage, and there's always gaps that emerge there. So we've seen scenarios where we've literally seen 100+ stages in a sales workflow before. And then the client is wondering, I think I'm getting a lot of leads, why aren't they closing? And we're well, there's 100 places where they could be dropping off. What are you doing in between? And we see that a lot. Now the good news is these clients have actually tried to implement systems to they're doing something as opposed to nothing. But it's a total disaster when you get in. And that causes a lot of anxiety. And then people get fired, and then stress levels go up even more.
Do you feel that that's one of the primary reasons why they bring you in? Is that the most common pattern that you see? The fact that companies at a certain stage overcomplicate things?
I hope so.
Or is it that, well, we don't know, we're at this stage, we don't know how to structure it? Is it we structure it too much, come in and tangle it, or is it we don't know how to structure it?
Unfortunately, it's both. And we're fairly early in our journey, right? So we're about 2.5 years into this model. We get most of our clients actually because they've heard about us as a trustworthy company. So we've done almost all of our business growth so far through referrals. And it's because we've spent so much time in the weeds with founders, sometimes for free, sometimes trying and failing. We were talking earlier, I do a ton of mentorship. I put a lot of content out there. My co-founder puts a lot of content out there. We try to give. And so that reciprocity rule kicks in. We don't expect it to, but it does. And 2 years in, we find ourselves over and over again, our clients come to us and they say oh, you're kind of you're like the agency I can trust, or you're not even an agency. You're like this consultancy, or you're a part of my team. You're an extension of my team. That's what we hear. So we're trying to figure out what's our tagline? Because those are nice taglines, but it's about 50-50 where sometimes these clients are underutilizing their team and people are just we don't know what they're doing. And then 50% of the time, these are startup people. They want to be busy, they're working, but they're just not focused because there's no continuity. There's no playbook that they can follow. And we've even had scenarios where a new head of revenue comes in and just can't quickly enough bridge the gap between marketing and sales. And then that person gets fired. And then who takes over when that happens? Does it go back to the CEO? Who owns the customer journey at that point? Does it go back to product? So it's messy. And all of these companies are structured so differently that I wish there was a straightforward answer, but there's not.
So I'm going to shift gears in a second, talk a bit about you as a founder and so on. But this is such an interesting realm that you're operating in, because I've I've seen a variety of setups when it comes to companies that are at the growth acceleration stage. What are the companies that you feel are the easiest to work with? Because like you said, you're seeing a variety of teams coming and working with you because they have needs and so on. What is, you go in and say, right, I know that I can make these guys successful really quick.
It's when they've figured out, and however long it's taken them and however rough of a manner it's been, they've figured out how to get to product market fit. And they've generally got one or two channels that are working. Often it's outbound, right? So often just by brute force, these founders have figured out how to sell their product in a crowded market by just hammering it home through a lot of cold outreach and going to conferences and cold calling, hitting people up on LinkedIn, all the outbound channels. We don't do any of that work. So when we get a company like that comes to us, it usually means that marketing is going to work for them, right? Because they've already built a pipeline. If you get to that point, you already know your messaging works. You already know your revenue model to some degree is working. You already know that you probably don't have a major churn problem.
Yeah.
You know who your customer is. You know what the market is. So we can take that and we can interview the team and say, okay, well, are you a high intent product? Are people searching for it? Oh yeah, people are searching for it. Search engine marketing and search engine optimization are phenomenal. We can churn those on in a matter of weeks, and that could be as big of a pipeline as all of the outbound combined, right? Yeah. They have to apply capital to it. And if they're like, well, no, that's not really intent, we have to really educate them, then that's a different path. But those companies that come to us and they've kind of, frankly, they've just grounded out for a while, right? They've had enough grit to survive. And yeah, they've probably gone through changes and it's been bumpy and it's been hard for them. But they tell the story and they're 3 or 4 years in and they've got some traction now. And then we come in and we can apply all of our best practices. Then it compounds. That's when it works well.
And I feel, I don't know, in my view, seeing companies, working for companies, building my own, that's what founders usually focus on, except in situations where you're very much content oriented and focused and experienced. But a lot of founders focus on the quick ROI. Let's sort out our sales and this and that, and then we can think about these other things like content, SEO optimization, and getting more organic funnels.
Yeah. Unless they've raised money, right? If they've raised money, then the whole model shifts. Then they move to a marketing first, and they say, well, I worked at a startup where I had a $3.5 million marketing budget every month. We had competition. We blew the competition out of the water with an inferior product. Now our retention was bad. That led to catastrophic failures later on with the company. But when you raise capital or you're dealing with a competitor that's got capital, they don't care how much it costs to acquire a customer. They might not even be monetizing. They're probably losing money. So there are network or kind of industry things or just market positioning and timing. We're in a weird economy right now. Salespeople are saying 2023 is one of the hardest years they've ever had in SaaS businesses. So there are some weird outlier scenarios like that. But yeah, generally you're right. Yeah, the founders should spend their time on sales. I fear that a lot of them get caught up in product though, and they lose years of their company as a result.
Yeah. How do you find, because you're talking about 2023 being the hardest for salespeople reporting, how do you find it for yourself and for your business?
2023 was hard, really hard.
When did it start in, because I remember 2022, from autumn, it started getting bad for SaaS businesses. They're starting to report negative in terms of growth and such. And actually, at that point, we were in an LOI And we're
Yep.
super concerned about it. Oh my goodness, what's going on in the world? Google, this, that, all reporting that they're not achieving their targets. And I was looking at my co-founder, Nikki, are we still going to get acquired or not? So
This was a year ago, right?
yeah,
Just about a year ago. Yeah.
in September, October, November 2022, that's when it hit.
We were starting to feel it. Well, so the backstory is like we weren't an agency. We were a training company. So we had a really sexy business model. We were doing live cohort-based training. We sold hundreds of seats into these programs, teaching founders all of the fundamentals of growth that we thought that they needed to do to go and do it on their own. If you asked me 3 years ago, was I going to build a growth agency? I would have said, you're absolutely crazy. No, I'll do pro bono work. Absolutely not. I'm
So
going to
what
run
happened?
from that.
What happened? Tell me.
Well, the pandemic was an accelerant for that business model where people were kind of
The education, you mean?
Yeah, the education. So if you think about it, like, so we were a very small version of like a Section 4 or Reforge. So we had created these high quality, on demand and live courses that we put together. I had a pretty successful course called Mastering Growth, which talked about the fundamentals of how to grow a startup. And it was like these 5 themes, and every week I would go deep into these themes. And at the height of the pandemic, they're looking for stuff to do. I mean, it was like a money printing machine. But as the pandemic started to shift and the market started to act different too, it wasn't just money being thrown at everything at this point, right? When it started to come down a little bit, we started to see an indication that, okay, well, this cohort was a lot, like we had to put a lot more effort into this cohort to get the same or fewer level of students. And now you see like our competitors who had raised huge amounts of money are starting to go through major like cuts in their staff. And a bunch of them went through multiple rounds of layoffs and stuff. So we saw the writing on the wall with that. And we decided, okay, well, we either need to raise money, like raise more money, because we were venture backed. We've now moved into a bootstrap. So we're profitable now, but we had burned money for 2 years. So
you technically closed that venture and started
We
fresh.
just rolled it into this.
Right.
Because I thought that was the fair thing to do with our investors. So we changed our name. We brought everything over. We took our, so we did kind of like what I would consider the ultimate pivot. Like we took our $1,000 a seat content and made it free.
Oh, wow.
So,
because I was going to ask, because you talked at past tense in the sense we did with this, that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, does that mean that content doesn't exist?
No, it's still there, and we still produce new content. Okay. And sometimes we monetize it, but 95% of it, we just put it out there for free. The way we've grown our business so far, and I think this is going to change in 2024, but it's been very organic, very word of mouth, very referral based, and trust based. And so, what's a great way to build trust with an audience? I mean, as you know, put great content out there.
Thought leadership,
be
authority
accessible,
building.
Answer questions, like be accountable, like dive deep, talk to people, do mentorship, right? Help companies out, like give. And so we started to realize like almost 2 years ago, actually, that this model was going to shift, that maybe there's always going to be this monetization of training, but the training business either needs to raise money, shut down, and we all like do different things. Like I get a job or I start something else or whatever. Same thing with everybody else. Like we just let everybody go and people have to go figure out what they're going to do. Or we pivot and we start doing the thing that everybody has been asking us to do anyways, which is like help them with marketing. So before we would say like, we just can't spend any time one-on-one with people. So I did all sorts of things. We did weekly mentorship calls. We had a subscription model. So like we'd have 20 or 30 people on a weekly call. And then that was weird because somebody would always dominate the conversation or somebody would ask a really awkward question or say something inappropriate in a group. I didn't know how to moderate this stuff. So we stopped that. And then we started doing like, we had all these experimentation packages. So like on a monthly basis, we just run experiments for you. Ultimately, all I was trying to do was like avoid building the damn consulting company. It's just like, I was like, no, we're not doing it. And finally, I had a good set of conversations with my team, and my co-founder and our COO were just like, look, this is a core business. We can build, like, we knew we could build a successful business. We just flipped it on its head. And the demand was really, really strong. The market, though, I mean, back to your question on market, it was June of 2022 that we started to really feel, even with the agency, which is like, it's so much easier to sell services than sell a product, right? So
it depends on who you ask.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been in entrepreneurship for a long time. In my service companies, and maybe I'm better at service sales, but like I've run a bunch of product companies. Getting product sales going is really hard. Once you get it moving and you've got a team and stuff, then it becomes easier. Whereas the grind of like the consulting sale never really stops, but it's easier to get to early revenue, right? If you're differentiated, and I think my model with this current company is differentiated enough where like it's been relatively easy for us to grow. Right? I do a lot of calls with agency founders who are at like 10 or 20,000 monthly recurrent revenue and they don't know how to grow it. And I know why they don't know how to grow it, because there's a bunch of reasons why. We can get into that if we want, but that market started to change in June of 2022, and it's been a bumpy ride since then. I mean, we've been lucky. Like our revenue has continued to go up. We've had down months. So it's been like this. I like to say it's been like, I guess the camera's like this, up and to the right, but it's been like this. So it's going up into the right.
Yeah.
But we've had a couple negative months in the last 18 months, which are terrifying, especially when we're back to bootstrapping.
Do you have runway?
We do, because we're profitable now.
Okay.
But we had, within the last 4 months, I've done what I call move money around. Any loan we can take, I've put personal capital in, I've skipped payroll, not outside money at all, right?
Okay.
Don't pay myself, don't pay the executive team, executive haircuts. We've made changes to the team. We've had to take a hard look at like full-time versus part-time. So we've been through the ringer. Like it hasn't been easy, but we're past that.
So I'm interested. How do you have those conversations with the executive team in a sense? How do you approach that? Because there's one thing the founders, right? Well, it's high stakes game.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
You understand each other. Yeah, we just don't take money, don't take dividends or salaries.
Yeah.
But how do you have those conversations with the executive team?
So there's 3 executives, 2 are founders and 1 is not. And the third executive who's not a co-founder essentially acts like a co-founder. So we've been through a lot with like the pivot and early business model and then the growing team and the additional business lines. I like to say like we've been through the ringer. And so the 3 of us are like, it's like a tripod. It's like a really strong tripod with different skill sets that we each bring to the table. And there's been an understanding that like the 3 of us will personally do whatever it takes to have the business succeed, right? Like, because we're fully committed. The next layer of teammates, though, some people that go back to the earliest days of the company, we never missed a payroll. So we never did pay cuts. We never missed a payroll. Now we have let people go we've had a couple scenarios where it just hasn't been a perfect fit. And we always leave the door open and we always help that person find the right next thing.
Yeah, you have to.
We have to. But with the bigger team, what's interesting is that we're pretty radically transparent, right? So like I have a model, I've got a financial model that generally is within 2 to 3% of where we're going to end up in revenue and expenses every single month.
Okay.
So I have my forward-looking revenue based on historical growth rates and based on what we're seeing with pipeline. So I model it out. And I do a best, mid, and low case scenario.
And those dips that you were talking about, were those in those averages?
So
did you predict it accurately?
For the most part, I joke that into the summer, we had 6 of the worst months ever that we would have predicted,
Right.
and we still survived.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we had scenarios where, I mean, just it was harrowing. We had scenarios where we were literally tens of thousands, I mean, almost in six figures on receivables from clients that were like waiting on funding rounds, or like we're waiting on a payment from somebody, and like we're not getting paid while that, you know, when it was earlier, we would just put everything on a client's credit card and they'd pay us up front. But as you get bigger, you can't put, you know, clients, especially in this market, they don't want to put a $15,000 a month bill on a credit card. So all of a sudden, like, the challenges were different. All of a sudden, I'm running a receivables model. I never had receivables before. So, like, we did predict a lot of it, but there was still, it's like every month there would be something that would like hit me over the top of the head. And I would talk to my wife about it. I'd be like, oh my God, like this thing happened. And she'll like coach me through it and we'll talk about it. Okay, well, how do we get better for the next month? And then solve that problem. And then the next month it's like, okay, well, somebody left. Okay, and then the next month, like some privacy change happened in it disrupted, or generative AI comes out and it disrupts SEO. That's like one of our 3 business models, right? So it's literally endless. But I would say that and I think this is a takeaway for every founder. Like if you go in a room of 100 founders and you say, how many of you have a financial model that you can actually use to predict where you're going to be? Some of them raise their hand. They all should raise their hand, right? Because even our low case model had a little bit of wiggle room. And I always knew that like if, you know, we always had like another stop that we could pull if we had to. Worst case was we could shrink the team.
Yeah.
Right? And we've had to do that a couple times. And generally when we've had to do that, it's actually timed well for both the person and the company. So this stuff's not pretty. We try to be transparent about what's coming up. In the growth model, I have our monthly bank balance. I have revenue expected, actual revenue, the model, expenses, cash in bank, expected cash in bank at the end of the month, and our entire team has access to that.
We are doing that at Jigsaw quite well as well, and it's not because of me, because I'm a messy mess in a sense. Like if it was for me, I would just consider the bank account as a money pit, right? And that's just my nature. Whenever someone's presenting me numbers, it takes me a while to make do with that. To understand it and to acknowledge it is not, I don't know, it's this one of these things where that's not my thing, that's not for me. So, but I was super lucky with Nikki. She's very analytical and very calculated when it comes to steps. Like I plunge into things a lot more because I want to try stuff. I'm the try guy, right?
Yeah.
Let's try this, let's do that. Nikki's very contained in a sense.
Yeah.
So very early on, she was like, well, we raised this money. We need to figure out, because we had seed investment, we need to figure out what our runway is, for how long can we survive with this? Yeah. And also, Biro, because you started talking to people left and right about hiring them, about doing this, come work for me, let's do this. Like, we need to figure out when we're going to run out of money, because we got 200K seed investment.
Yeah.
200K.
Yeah.
And she was like, you're already starting to spend this money.
Yeah.
We need to figure out. And she made this super nice spreadsheet with the actuals, with the forecast. We could increase the expenditure on employees and basically see how that impacts. When do we go on minus? How do we, all of these things. So I think that was a lifesaver in a sense.
Look, I learned this the hard way. So we raised money during the pandemic on a business model that printed money. I mean, I sold hundreds of thousands of dollars of seats into this program before we even had a company. Like before I had even left my prior job. Like I started this as a side hustle. I had all this content, I was putting it out there. And we raised just under $1 million in like 2 weeks, right at the time when everybody was just throwing money at startups during the pandemic. And we were going big. So we hired, we invested a lot. And luckily we'd raised enough to have a little bit of a runway to be able to pivot. So like if we had no runway, we probably would have had to shut the business down.
Right, yeah.
Because there was a ramp up time when we decided like, okay, we're going to sell services. It's not like you make that decision. You're like, oh, goodbye training, hello services in one day. It's like you're winding this down and now you're trying to figure out like, how do I even talk about this? What do we even offer?
Yeah.
Okay, it's one thing to say like, we're going to sell services. What services are we going to sell? We sold anything and everything, and there was a disaster. Like, I apologize to our earliest clients who really suffered with us. Some of them are still with us, which is so great.
Good.
Right?
That's the type of customers that.
But like, oh my God, right? The biggest constraint though, when money became our biggest constraint about 8 or 9 months ago, that's when it forced us to say, okay, now every decision is higher stakes. Because in the past, we could have been like, well, we're not going to make a team change here because we've got $800,000 in the bank, $700,000 in the bank. Oh, by the way, I also have investors. So we send a really detailed investor update every month, right? So we send it, and we're held accountable.
What question was that part of the initial agreement, or was it put in place at the pivot?
No, we raised no money after the pivot.
Right. No, I mean, because you can raise money and have lighter terms in terms of what you're reporting with your angel investors.
Right.
But the reason why I was asking, because I was thinking, well, when that pivot happened, investors want a better understanding of.
They wanted to know.
Okay, now I want you to report on this, because.
Well, I mean, there's more to the story. I mean, so we pitched not only training, but we pitched a product. We had a couple product ideas that we're going to execute on, and we dabbled in a product in 2023, and it failed.
What was it around?
It was a thought leadership product. So one of the things that I believe firmly, and I think we're on the same page with this, is like content development and building your own brand. And so we don't offer this package anymore, but we used to offer this package where we would help founders kind of find their voice and like record stuff, and we'd script things for them, and we'd help them distribute it in the wild.
Right.
Thought leadership content. Mm-hmm. So we started building the bones of a product that would automate a lot of that. So we're using Squadcast for the recording of thought leadership sessions, and then we would use Veed to do the editing. And these products all have APIs. So we built a single sign-on login, and you could create an account. You could subscribe to our product. You could get an account. You could log in, and there's things that the product would let you do that over time we're going to get more and more automated, so that no human would have to be involved other than the person who's trying to record their own thought leadership content. So like they'd click a button, and like their social posts would be distributed for them. They'd be cut and distributed for them. And it turns out like people didn't really want that product. What they wanted was the consultation. They wanted a human to tell them like what to do and what to say, and they wanted to be handheld.
Yeah, I do. I am wondering though, because I see this pattern quite a lot. I built a lot of products, SaaS software, and usually it starts like that, where there's a need for education, there's a need for hand-holding, but from experience, as I was talking to people and mentoring and giving this advice and so on, and building a product in the background, sometimes it's a bit of an art, right? Sometimes I was able to transfer the customers into the product.
Yeah, totally.
And funnel that. And I never really got enough traction to make things happen, but I could see how that would work. But it's not always going to work. I think there's a variety of people. You have your users that you build your automated onboarding funnels for, and then you have your users that want a demo and support with setup. And
it's
so
not binary. Like, it's not just product led or sales led, right? It's usually both. But yeah, I mean, we might have been able to make it work. Like, we were trying to do that. We were actually selling seats into it. But when I factored in, again, like having to make tough decisions based on finances, right? In making the conscious decision to not do any more fundraising, when we looked at the expense of like having full-time engineering, and I'm spending a lot of my time on product management. I love product management. That's what I did as a career before I got into growth. I was a software engineer and then a product manager for like 12 years or something. When you add all that up and you start to attribute like my time against like the P&L and the cost, and then an engineer, and then it becomes a distraction for other people, and then it needs to be marketed, we just couldn't justify it. Maybe in 2 years, we resurrect something like that. Like, we're not giving up our product hopes, but we're probably not building a product in 2024.
Yeah.
Right.
At the end of the day, we were talking about this product. Do you have to? Why? Because it's cool, because everyone does it. If you love what you love, do what you love, right? At the end of the day.
I think service companies get a bad rap oftentimes for good reasons. Like, a lot of service companies, like the definition of like building a successful service company is often like hiring the cheapest talent so you get the highest margins so that you can sell for the best multiple, and multiples are pretty bad for service companies. Tech-enabled service companies, totally different model. So we're kind of going that route.
Right.
But just not having the pressure from, I mean, look, I still feel the pressure from the investments that we took on, and we absolutely plan to sell the company, right? But now it's a question of like building it to a level of scale. Like the concept of us building, we're well above $1 million in ARR right now, right? So like if we were well above $1 million in ARR in a product, our investors, it's guaranteed they're probably going to make pretty good money off of their investment. Service company, not as much, right? So we need to get to 20 to 50 million in revenue before we can really consider doing much in terms of like having a big exit or big win for the investor side. The other side of it, though, to your point, is like, I actually love working hands-on with customers. Like, there's a curiosity that I have that when you get to be invited behind the scenes of how these companies are all operating, not only do we like see all the bad shit, but we get to learn from the best too. Like, we've got clients that have bootstrapped to 15 or 20 million in revenue. And then we've got other clients that have raised 20 million in revenue, and they're at 20 million in revenue. And we've got bootstrapped companies that are at 100,000 ARR. And those are wildly different businesses, and I get to see how they all operate.
But it does sound like you discovered that you enjoy this area. It was a discovery bit, because from what you're saying is that you did hang on to not having to start a service business for quite a while, trying things.
Yes.
And eventually
failed.
Your team convinced you, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, I was the one that said, like, look, my co-founder also, like, she had an agency as well, and we kind of just merged them together. And it was like, look, do we want to work together? Yeah, we do. Okay. Is services like the sexiest business model? No. Do we like it? Sure. Is it hard? Yeah. But I think when you find, like, for me at this stage in my career and journey, like, versus going out and getting a job or being a solopreneur, like, I don't want to be a solopreneur. I want to have a team. Like that's where I'm at with my life stage. Like for a while I wanted to be a solopreneur. I did that for a while. I freelanced. I did freelance product management and growth consulting and stuff like that. I was at bigger companies before. I've been a non-founder, I've been a founder. Right now, I want a like lean and mean team that does like world-class work, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And it's also going pretty well. So it's not as sexy as like a product, but it's paying the bills, and we can be ambitious with it. There's a lot of growth to be had, but it's not for everybody.
Oh yeah, for sure. But it delights me that you discovered your passion for it
Right.
after saying no to it so many times.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the things that I've learned in my 13 years of failing at business is that if you're flexible and you take on opportunities, even though they don't look as like opportunities for you at that stage, they might eventually become opportunities for you. I think that's one of the truest truths that I've heard out there and that I've experienced as well. Because the reason why I failed so many businesses in the past is because I was always like this.
Yeah.
Laser focused, nothing else. Oh, like I wanted to build the SaaS, had these opportunities left and right. No. My focus is this, and continue to fail down that path. Where would I be if I would have been a bit wiser early on, and I would have taken opportunities and been a bit flexible? I don't know, but now, learning what I've learned in the last couple of years, I feel like maybe I would have been better off. I would have been doing, I don't know, having a bigger impact doing this, because again, I've kicked a lot of opportunities because I was like, I don't like that area. I don't think I would enjoy it. But at one point I was at an inflection point where I was seriously considering whether to go down the route of filmmaking and do something in this area, or continue and try to build a SaaS business. Mm-hmm. And I continued. I persevered. Yeah, I had an exit last year after 13 years of trying, right? But who knows? Maybe like yourself, I would have said no, and then started something in filmmaking and realized I really love this.
Well, a couple things there. Like, first of all, full alignment. Like that tagline a while back, you should like put that out into social media. So whatever. It was so good, and it's so true. But I've also seen like people go way too wide and have no focus, and that's also really dangerous. So it is about finding that sweet spot. But here's the challenge is like what you see on LinkedIn is like all these people telling you to do all these things, or like stay focused, or like don't stay focused, or run ads or don't run ads, hire that person, don't hire that person, get a freelancer, be a solopreneur, start. And it's like, it's really disorienting. Yeah. And what you have to realize is that like all of those people also are trying to run their own businesses and sell their own thing. And it doesn't mean that thing, they could be like inspirational and aspirational, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
On the point of like going, kind of just like staying too focused. Like I failed with 2 startups doing that too.
What were they, if you can share?
Yeah, one was a content management system.
Okay, so still in the content education.
This was like 20 years ago. This was like, we spent 18 months building a product without talking to customers. 18 months in an office in Kendall Square in Cambridge, Mass, right near MIT, when office space was cheap. Like before that was a cool area in Boston. And it was myself and a few other people that founded this company. Everybody was like, they were really smart, good at software engineers, like really good software engineers. 18 months building this thing. We sold a couple seats, and it turns out we built something that nobody cared about. That same year is when WordPress and Drupal and Joomla and Squarespace, and I think Wix, all came out. And we were an enterprise content management system. We were looking for consulting jobs faster than you could blink. Like, we had no market. So that was an area where we stayed so deeply focused that we didn't come out of it. Another time was, it was actually a company that I founded that got a little bit of funding, and it was a SaaS platform for this really like esoteric type of online contest, basically for March Madness basketball in the United States. And it took that concept, like this really kind of niche concept, and brought it to life online. And I just didn't have a business model for it for years. So it went from being like a full-time thing to a part-time, back to like a full-time. Like, I went in and out of it. And in that scenario, like, we had actually started to find product market fit. And as a result, talked to investors who wanted to put money into it, raised money on the promise of making something bigger, like more of a platform.
Who were your competitors for something like this at that point?
Jebbit is probably, the biggest competitor now. At the time, for bracket software, we had occasional competitors that would pop up. They'd win some business, and then they would go out of business because the market was really small. So it was maybe a $10 million a year business.
It was a niche.
But we did multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in one of our years, like in 2016, I think it was. We did like $300-something thousand in revenue. So it wasn't nothing. And this is product revenue too. So, I mean, it was pretty significant. But I tried to just go too big with the darn thing and lost focus of like the real small niche that we could have turned into a $10 or $20 million business. Tried to go wide. Now tried to compete with marketing tech platforms that were that had huge budgets and could build technology a lot more robust than we could build. And we got crushed. I remember company was almost out of money. We had a renegotiation on a contract with our two biggest clients. And we thought because we built all this cool stuff, we're going to basically triple our prices. And instead of them seeing the value in that, I was just obnoxious, didn't realize what I was doing, how bad it was. And they just said goodbye. And we lost our biggest clients. And, that didn't actually kill the company, but it just was a use case in the value of staying focused. So I don't know, right? It's hard. Stay too focused and you lose opportunities. You go too wide, you lose opportunities. Maybe that's where luck plays a role.
People laugh at the thought that luck has anything to do with business, and
so much.
And it's one of the biggest factors.
Yeah.
People, and I see this in a lot of young entrepreneurs, early 20s and so on. They feel like they have the bulls by the horns,
right.
And it's theirs to lose.
Totally.
And it's not like that. Yes, it really depends on you and the type of traits that you convey in order to make something successful. But in the same time, luck is a big part of it.
Yeah, you know what else is actually the hard work of grinding it out for years.
Yeah, we're talking about persistence. Yeah.
And sacrificing the things that, there's a lot of stuff that you sacrifice. There's a lot that you gain as an entrepreneur. You gain a lot. That's why I do it. I spend a ton of time with my family and my kids. Right? I generally go to everything. I get involved with their school. I have the luxury of being able to do that. But it also means I do a workshop on a Saturday,
right.
Or I fly here on a Sunday, right? Or I'm working some nights, or that there's almost no downtime.
But you have that flexibility, and that, I feel that's more powerful than anything else. To be honest, I would take that any day versus having to work a very strict schedule and having to make things around my professional. I would rather make my professional life around my personal life.
Probably the saddest I've ever felt as a person in a job had nothing to do with the performance of the job or the company. It had to do with when I felt like I had to be sitting in a seat, I was done with my work. Like the way that I work, like I work in sprints. Like I'm highly, highly productive, and then I'm not as productive. And then I'm highly productive, and then I'm not. That's just how I operate. Everybody's got their own way of operating. And I would just crank out a massive amount of work. And it'd be like 3 o'clock or 3:30. But I have to stay at the office until 5:30 and then sit in traffic, and I get home at 7. That takes a big toll on one's mental health and one's family. And it's way, way more about that stuff than money or anything else.
And to be honest, if there's one positive thing that came out of the pandemic is the fact that people start understanding that a bit more.
I agree.
Like forcing everyone to work from home, and now living in this weird world where some companies forcing their employees back to work, some have seen the value. I think that's one of the things that we realize is it's not about the amount of time, it's the output. And there were whispers in the corporate world before the pandemic about output, not time investment, right?
Totally.
But I think now it's becoming a lot more accepted.
I think so too, although you do see a big shift. Like some of these big companies are forcing people back full time, and it's almost like become like this political thing. Like, look, I get it. I mean, it's hard to manage an output-based company. If you've got 500 people at your company, you've had to justify hiring 500 people. You've got 500 butts in seats. Somebody has to like quantifiably be able to measure the output.
Yeah.
Otherwise the company gets stale, right? And that's actually really hard to do. And so I understand why. And look, also like if you work for a company, they get to decide what you do. I'm sorry to say it, but like,
very true.
We've all been there. I've had plenty of jobs where like, it feels like the worst ones were when my kids were little. And there's always a trade-off. There's always a trade-off between time and money, investing in now versus investing in the future. 100% of the time, I'm living that trade-off right now.
What do you mean by that?
So, like, right now, I'm greatly underpaid compared to where I would be at a big corporate job, as like head of revenue or CMO or a CEO, right? But if I were doing that, then I'm probably in a fairly buttoned down scenario where the trade-off...
You're in the now, basically, that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, conversely, if you trade off too much of the money for time, then you get yourself into trouble because you don't have the personal runway to deal with things that come up, right? And I've been through all of this, like through, like multiple times in my career, and I've had scenarios where whatever I'm working on just didn't quite work. And then I go and get a job, make a lot of money, and sometimes get lucky with something that I worked on, got bought or whatever. So like, it's super, super messy, but every scenario is going to have a trade-off. And I think that's more significant the earlier you are in the company structure. Like if you're a founder, you're living that every day. Like, do you buy the new camera equipment or do you take a vacation? Do you take the day off and lose revenue, or do you get that experience with your partner, right? Like, it's just never ending.
Yeah. You have to take these decisions constantly on a daily basis. And I think what's the most important thing is what's important to you. I'm keep on doing these analogies with the same word in the same phrase twice or three times. I don't know what's wrong with me today.
It happens.
But you know what I mean, as in you prioritize the stuff that are important to you. I mean, some of us do. There's still a lot of people that don't do that because of influences. And to be honest, I think we're put here on this earth for a very finite amount of time. You should prioritize the things that are important to you. Now, there is an asterisk, like with everything. Too much of that and being too ignorant to the impact that certain things will have might take you to a place where you can't prioritize anymore.
Totally.
So it's never simple. It's never black and white. It's always gray.
I mean, I think a lot of it is, it's like your personality when you come out, right? And how you were raised too. Like, you know, it's the nature and nurture thing. And like, you know, I think that resiliency, like, can you teach resiliency a little bit? But it's also like an innate part of your composure as a human. Yeah, you can definitely teach resiliency, but you're also going to have some people that are just inherently more resilient, so or have less anxiety, and so can quit a job and start a business. For a lot of people, they can't even have this conversation because they can't think about the lack of structure. Not that they're happy with the structure, but the alternative is, you know, panic inducing. And then you have the total other extreme. Like, it'd be really hard for me, knock on wood, to go and take a job. Mm-hmm. At least right now. Like, you know, I just, I don't know what's going to happen after, like, the next chapter after this company. But for me to think about going and working inside of, like, you know, full-time inside of a company is just a thought that I don't think of a lot. But 10 years ago, I was like, I want to get a couple more stints within companies to get to a point where, like, the next thing that I do, I've got more experience. Maybe that changes. I don't know.
Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a founder first and a teacher second, or the other way around? And then the follow-up question, how did you get into this teaching and education content? Okay,
so I think I'm a founder first. That's a really good question. I think I'm a founder first, but I'm also a teacher. But, you know, like, I think one of my weaknesses is that I expect as founders, we kind of have to be able to predict the future a little bit, or at least kind of fake it till we make it. And I expect everybody around me to do the same thing, which means that part of my weakness is that I don't often provide enough context, because in my head, everything makes sense. Like, of course we're going to do, but I may not even have said that out loud.
I'm the same. I can relate 100%. I'm like, I have this vision, and sometimes I find it very difficult to express it in a way that people around you will never have the exact same interpretation of your vision like you do.
Yeah. Totally.
It's impossible, right? But what you can do is plant as much of that, verbalize as much of that, and have everyone make it their own.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's very hard. Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupted. But it's very hard to vocalize it.
And sometimes you don't vocalize it. Like, you just forget to. Yeah. Like, there's oftentimes I'm like, I swear I said that, but I didn't. You know, and somebody's like, no, I didn't have any of that context.
Like, our boss is losing his mind.
Oh my God, yeah, Jesus. Yeah, entrepreneurs as employees are a rough batch. In terms of, like, how I got into teaching and stuff, you know, so my mom was a teacher, my aunt was a teacher, a lot of my family was a teacher. I was also very entrepreneurial as a kid. I started my first business in college. And that led to kind of continuing that out of college. And then I worked for a couple companies, and then I started my own thing. And then I went to a bigger company doing very similar things, and that was really successful. So I've been in and out of it, but I actually went into college wanting to be an education major and a teacher. And then I started to learn more about business and stuff. And I switched majors like so many times. Like when I was a senior in college, I had to take my second semester, my last semester in college, where everybody's out just like having fun. I took 6 classes to get 18 credits so that I could graduate on time. So I don't recommend that. I switched so many times, but many of my jobs when I was in high school were like, I coached track for kids. Like I worked at like a clubhouse for like an after school type program. So I always like educating, teaching. I did a lot of work with kids and stuff. And then I realized, okay, well, it's not really kids. It's more like I like mentorship. I like being able to share the stuff that I've learned in a non-conventional way. So I didn't want to go and be a teacher. I just stumbled on this. So the way I got into like startup mentoring was I was working a job in Washington, D.C. that I had over an hour commute to get into. And I was sitting in the car in traffic, like, what the hell do I do now? So I started asking myself questions that I kept hearing about how to grow a startup. And I would literally record my answer on my iPhone in like the voice memo app. And I would transcribe those. And those became like early blog posts. And like, that was my early content. I was originally going to write a book. And the book actually became material for my courses. And then I got into that. But I got the mentorship bug when I got on this platform called Growth Mentor. And I just do it all for free. But I like giving back and being able to share my experience with the founders enables me to also learn from them and then kind of repeat that process. So that's how it all happened.
Yeah, I do. Like I have, for example, friends that retired, made an exit and retired. And I think that's one of the things that they do. And I also advise people that had an exit, don't want a job, don't want to start a new business, consult and mentor.
Definitely.
Because that's how you stay fresh in thinking, in trends, in understanding what other customers, even if you per se retire where you don't want to do another business or build something else, just mentoring other people keeps you in a loop. And then you have more things to focus on and talk about and think about, especially if you're not at a retirement age, which usually happens.
Yeah, like we need stuff to do. And so many people need help. Like founders they don't like to admit it, but they need a lot of help. We need a lot of help. I need a lot of help, right? I need mentors. I have mentors. I have people that I can call. There's this whole like view that like the founder is strong and resilient. And like you have to be, but you also have to be vulnerable. And, you have to have a thick skin, and you need to deal with risk, and you need to deal with tough markets and things changing and firing people and hiring and competitors. I mean, it's literally endless. And if that stuff stresses you out, like if all of those things I just said stress you out, then maybe entrepreneurship right now isn't right for you. Maybe start a side hustle and like dabble in it. It's not binary either. Like you don't have to quit your job to start something, right? Like
very true.
I'm a testament to that. Like 2 of my companies that I started nights and weekends. Totally okay to do that.
Yeah, same. I started Jigsaw with Nikki side of disk thing. I'm doing Misfit Founders. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a founder of. I'm a founder of Misfit Founders, right? But I think I got burnt out, and I'm in a good place where I'm working for our buyer company, and I get to do this as well. So there's ways out there. It's not just well, if I'm not a founder, if I'm not a successful exited, or if I'm not getting VC and so on. Like
Yeah.
the amount of people that I saw I talked to that tell me I'm going to go for VC, but they have no idea why, is insane.
Yeah.
We're on this piggybacking type of trend of, well, the only way people will see me successful if I get a ton of investment. And if
I know it's like tying your own happiness to your revenue. I've been guilty of this, like a down month and I'm like kind of down. It's like I've really, really had to work hard to separate that. I'm curious though, if you don't mind me asking, how did you know that you were burned out? Like you said, I think I got burned out. Like what were the warning signs for you and what did you do about it?
I don't think I thought. I think I knew that I was getting burned out, and the signs for me were just an extreme lack of focus in work and drive and motivation. Like every single day became a blur and became a bit like first of all, the stress levels were so high and I would get triggered by the smallest thing.
Yeah.
And when you reach that, you take a step back and you think, well, what's wrong with me? Like I wasn't like this. I used to be a lot more like in a week I would have a predominantly positive outlook on things, and now is super heavy-hearted and everything is triggering, and I've lost the interest in this thing and this thing, and I actually lost interest in a lot of things. They just feel work. They feel like a burden.
So it wasn't just work; it was like other stuff too.
Yeah. So
like just life in general felt like harder.
Yes, and you get into the work affects you a lot more personally.
Yeah.
Right. So you take that home a lot more.
Yeah.
And then it's a shift from excitement and passion to just feeling tired all the time and stress, which overshadow your excitement and your passion for stuff to a point where you think that you're not passionate anymore, you're excited about that. It may very well not be that. It's usually these are the symptoms of being burnt out. Because if you take breaks and you regenerate, you might find that you're still excited about those things, right? And I think that's done it for me. And there was a lot of factors that contributed to that.
Yeah, a lot of that resonates actually.
I have one more question for you, and then we'll close it with my regular
That's great.
3 flash questions. Let's put it like that. Because it's called Misfit Founders, and I think a lot of people relate to the challenging part and people talking about their challenges. I want to ask, what has been the toughest moment in your journey as a founder?
All time?
Yeah. If you can't decide on
that,
you can mention recent.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of tough times, but I'll say that probably the most prominent was a company that had raised a lot of money. A lot of money. We realized that there were just huge flaws in the business. And in one day, literally let go of like hundreds of people. And I knew about it a week in advance. And I had to decide like who stays and who goes. And this impacted a lot of people's lives. And this was a scenario that it was your typical Silicon Valley attitude of like, we're going to grow at all costs. And there were some real repercussions of it. Like walking into that room where I knew that there were, 100 something people or more in another room that were about to be told as a group that they were gone. And you're seeing them go in the elevator and you're in here, but you haven't started talking. Like people in this room don't know what's happening. but I know what's happening. And my job was easy compared to the people that had to deliver the news. And they did it in a very empathetic way. Like they did it in like as humane of a way as possible.
Right.
But that really, really sucked. So, but there's, if you're on the journey long enough, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of tough days.
Yeah. Have you had to, well, you mentioned that you've had to let go a couple of people. Have you had to downsize as a founder up until now? As in like multiple people at the same time?
Yeah, I've had to do it. A couple times, actually.
And what would you say the toughest feeling and thought is around that? Specifically, is it what kills you when you do? Like, to be fully transparent, I've never had, like, the only time I had to let people go was on common agreement that they weren't a fit and so on. But I've never had to let people go because of downsizing and financial things.
So I don't know if you can see, like I feel it in my whole body right now, because it's not, the act of actually firing somebody is scripted. So Lenny Rachitsky interviewed a guy. He's got a method on how to fire people. So if you go to Lenny's newsletter, Lenny's podcast, there's a whole episode on how to fire people with dignity. So the actual act of firing somebody probably isn't as bad as you think it is.
Yeah.
In the cases where I've done it, generally it's not a big surprise. Everybody's like, well, I don't want to be surprised when I'm fired. Well, you kind of are going to be. Like you can't really run a company with everybody thinking that they're like, hey, by the way, we've only got 2 weeks of runway or 4 weeks of runway. And what the executive team is talking about is like, which one of you guys is going to go? If you have that conversation every month with your team and your team is any good, they're gone. So you're kind of threading the line because you don't know. You could get another client or something could change. Somebody else could quit and you free up that revenue. You don't know what you don't know until the moment. But the moment of firing somebody is not the worst part because by then you've already gotten over all of the things and now you're just having a conversation. And once you're on, and you got to do it either in person or on video. You can't do it over the phone. You can't do it over email. You can't do it over text.
That would be terrible.
Just if you're going to fire
somebody.
People
do that.
People do it all the time.
What?
People do it all the time.
That's nasty.
The industry is littered with founders who have done that. And look, if you're a founder that's done that, just don't do it again. Right? Maybe you didn't know any better. Just don't do it again. Yeah. But that's generally like fairly scripted. I come in with a script.
Okay.
I've done enough where I come in with a script. And you always want to advocate for that person. And you want to give them time to like respond and react. And you don't want to go into the intricate details of like how they fucked up or like what you did wrong. Like just have the conversation, script it. It's the time before that. The time for me that's most stressful is when I know that a change has to happen, but I don't know exactly what has to happen. So you're looking at people and you're looking at budgets and you're looking at revenue and you're looking at receivables.
Yeah, that daunting
You're
thought.
looking at performance and you're like, I know I have to free something up, but I haven't made the decision yet on who. Once you make the decision on who, then it sucks because now you're like feeling empathetic for the person, but at least now you know. So it's like that waiting period.
Yeah, I never thought about it because I haven't been through it. And so on, but
it sucks.
But you're right. It does feel like taking the decision that you're going to downside or being forced to downside. And then the next immediate thought is, fuck. It's going to be someone. There's going to be a...
Yeah, there is going to be a change. Like somebody has to go. And it's going to change the company. Even if it's a big company, you fire somebody. Some people, though, are like machines with firing. I'm just not like that.
Yeah. Makes sense. Right. We're going to close it with 3 rapid questions.
Okay, I'm ready.
Number 1, what is a tagline that you live by?
I like the tagline, do the work. I think Jason Calacanis uses it. I don't know if he got it from somebody, but it's so true. Like, I know so many founders that are trying to take shortcuts, or businesses that are trying to take shortcuts.
Oh, yeah.
And you just kind of have to roll up your sleeves and do the work. And sometimes that just means you're going to be doing a lot of shit that you don't want to do for a while.
Yeah, very true. I do truly believe that one of the reasons why I failed so many times before Jigsaw was because I never looked at entrepreneurship as hard work. I looked at it. Well, that person made it.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many recipes out there. I'll just apply the recipe and I'll make it happen. And only when Nikki and I quit our jobs and said, okay, so we were doing that. We loved it. We put a lot of work and energy in it. Let's just move that here, is when things worked. Completely agree. Book that changed your life, either personal or professional.
On the professional side, and this is going back a long time, but the Startup Owner's Manual, Steve Blank.
Yeah.
It's literally like a workbook of, like, he calls it getting out of the building. I think founders now need to read that book. Because again, so many people want to try to skip the stages of growth and they want to, like, find shortcuts, but there aren't any shortcuts. And that book is going to help you think through the reasons why there's no shortcuts and give you a blueprint for working through them. I mean, on the personal side, like on the fiction or nonfiction books, I mean, there's so many. I've read a lot of books on, like, raising successful kids. I've read books on relationships. There's a book called Us, which is cool. Like, my wife and I will both read it. It's just about, like, I think the principles apply not just in relationships, but in business too. Like, how to be, it's us, not me and you, right? So if you think about that, like, again, it's a relationship book, but it can be used in a lot of different contexts. Like, there are a lot of takeaways there. I love pretty much everything that Dave Eggers puts out in terms of, like, just being able to take my mind away from, like, it's not always easy stuff, but take my mind away from stuff. He's really fascinating. So those are a few.
Really good books. Heard about the one, the work one, professional one, the Us one. I need to buy a version for both me and Nikki, because I think we'll relate so much. Like, we always talk about we.
Yeah.
And especially because we shared the professional stage and the personal stage, in a sense, because we're a couple, we're a family, and we also had a business together.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And last question, what is a good habit that you advocate for?
So look, I think being a founder is really hard. I think being an early team member is really hard, but being a founder is especially hard. So, I mean, it may sound cliche, but you do need to take care of your health, your 360 health. You know, it's...
Tell 20-year-old version of me that, please.
Yeah, me too. You know, like when I met my wife, kind of funny story, like that startup that I was telling you about that failed like 20 years ago. I actually started a cover band at the same time. I played drums. I started a really popular cover band that was making as much money playing, drums in a cover band as I was at the startup. So I did that just as a way to kind of pull it off. But, like, my health started to just, I put on a lot of weight, and, like, I grew up running. Like, I ran in college, and I ended up running marathons and stuff, and I still run to this day. But there's a period of time where, like, I just let my health go, and I've done that a few times. I had another scare a couple years ago, and you just have to stay in the game, like, mentally and physically.
Yeah.
So work out or do yoga. If you need to meditate. I try to. I haven't had a ton of luck, but just being more mindful in general.
Yeah.
Being less reactive, taking a deep breath before saying something. Like, these are all things that I've had to work on, focusing on relationships. But really, like, as cliche as it sounds, like, you have to take care of yourself because you're just getting beaten down every day. And it does take its toll on you. And that stress will take its toll. So, like, figure out what your avenues are. Hopefully they're healthy avenues, and kind of lean into those. And find a group of peers that are either going through or have gone through what you're going through, and ask for help.
Yeah. I think that's the amount of, because we all do it because we're young and stupid, but if you enter your 30 and you're still living like crap, I think you have a problem. Health is important. You can't really function. You're not going to be able to give 100% if you don't feel 100%.
Yeah.
There I go again.
No, it's good. I mean, you've got some good taglines. And you're working on social media.
Yeah,
but it's true.
I'm crap at that.
And it doesn't have to be binary. Like, you don't have to not do all these things and do all these other. It's just like, it's a spectrum, right? Nothing is binary, but like, just figure it out. And if you need help, get help. I mean, I think there's a lot of positive movement in the industry. You know, again, I'll mention Lenny Rachesky's podcast. He had Andy Johns on, talking about his own struggles with mental health. I mean, Andy Johns is one of the most successful operators of startups in Silicon Valley history, right? And had a ton of struggles that like we didn't know about.
Yeah.
Sharing those. So lean into that stuff.
Before we close, I have a gift for you.
No fucking
And
way.
actually, I didn't want it to tell you this because I didn't want it to influence when you're going to join me, whether it's going to be today or tomorrow or so on. I have a coin that I give every single founder that is a guest at the podcast.
Oh, nice.
And you're
I
guest
love
number
this.
10.
This is so cool. Thank you, man. I love that. What a cool gift.
Every single guest has a number. So
nice.
Because you've been guest number 10, you have number 10. It says I'm a Misfit, and then on the other side is the Misfit Founders Club.
Nice.
And it
that
also
is so cool.
Standing stand, so you can put it in the...
This will be in my office.
Awesome.
That is such a cool gift. Thank you so much.
And there's also I'll send you an email with thank you letter with a code. That's your exclusive guest club. Nice. And you'll get some perks with that as well.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait to promote the shit out of it. Awesome. It was a really fun conversation. You're a really good interviewer. I know it wasn't really an interview, but you're a really good conversationalist.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Being at the start of it, I'll take that.
No, it's good. I mean, I think just like pushing your guests to be vulnerable. You want to ask like how to like increase the positive shit going on in our industry. Like, yeah, it's a tough market. If the U.S. hits a recession, 2024 is going to be tough.
Yeah.
2023 was tough. Like, how much can people take? There's bad stuff going on in the world. We had the pandemic. Well, I mean, you're doing a good thing.
I'll look at it on a positive side. More founders that will feel like misfits. And want to share their stories.
I love it.